Good morning, my name is Francesco Orsini. I work for URBAM, the Center of Urban and Environmental Studies of the University of EAFIT, based in Medellin, Colombia. And today I will introduce you the case of the integral municipal plans, which is a strategy of intervention for mid to small towns located in the Urabá region in Antioquia. The project was financed by the French Agency of Development and was led by the Department of Antioquia. Let's start with a brief context of the Urabá region. Urabá is a region of Antioquia department whose capital is Medellin and is located in the Caribbean coast next to Panama. Urabá has a tremendous strategic location, being very close to the main water routes of commerce within the Caribbean, and again really close to the Channel of Panama. Urabá is also a unique region in terms of natural richness, being a hotspot of biodiversity, since it is included in the Chocó biogeographical region, which starts in Panama and ended up down in the frontier with Ecuador. As a consequence, it's also a region with a very high rate of rainfall. Actually, the level of rainfall is among the highest in the world, as we can see from the plan in the screen. This is a picture of Urabá taken from the air. We can see the Gulf of Urabá and then the rural areas which are really close by the cities that we are going to see in the next slides. This is an image which is very characteristic of Urabá, being the banana plantation, the most important economical activity of the region. Actually, most of the inhabitants of the cities are employed in the farms which are covering most of the region of the Urabá. Another characteristic of Urabá is its cultural diversity. In Urabá converge different geographical regions and also communities. As we can see from the map, in Urabá converge the Caribbean region, the Pacific region, and the Andean region. As a consequence, we have a really rich mix of communities. For example, we have many indigenous people as long as many Afro-Colombian communities together with white people and so and so. In this region, we have four main cities, which are Turbo, Apartadó, Carepa, and Chigorodó. These four cities are interconnected among each other with a route, with a main street, which goes all the way down to Medellin. The total amount of population in the urban areas of these four cities is around 300,000 inhabitants. But what is most interesting for our conference today is the rate of growth of this of population in these cities, which is around 3% per year. If we compare it with the rate of growth of Medellin, which is 0.9, we can fastly see how this region is experimenting a fast growth in terms of demographic growth. This is a typical condition in small to mid towns in Colombia and also in Latin America, being the trend that the migration from rural areas to urban areas is much more focused over these small realities, probably also because of the cheaper cost of land and so a more easy accessibility to housing solution. This is a picture of one of these four cities. This is Turbo, which is the only one located along the sea. As we can see, Turbo presents a pretty low density and also a pretty low level of consolidation, since, as we can see, streets are not paved, parks are still without urban furniture, and so and so. But after seeing all these characteristics and assets of the region, we also need to state out that Urabá is among the weakest subregions in Antioquia. This is because of its low capacity and dotational index. In the graph, we can see the 10 sub-regions which conform Antioquia, where the better off is for sure the Valle de Aburrá. The Valle de Aburrá is where Medellin, the capital of the department, is located. Medellin accounts for half the population of the whole Antioquia, being the population of the metropolitan area around 3.5 inhabitants. So Urabá, together with Bajo Cauca and Nordeste, is at the bottom of the graph, presenting the lowest indicators in terms of capacity and dotational index. Accordingly, Urabá presents very low levels of quality of life, bad infrastructure, low institutional capacity, and economic growth. As a consequence, the governor of Antioquia, the Governor Fajardo, which was the former mayor of Medellin during the 2004-2007 administration, when for the first time the policy of social urbanism was implemented, decided to replicate this successful model of intervention in Urabá, obviously at a different scale. And basically the strategy is to invest in infrastructure, social investment, and other different programs in the most deprived areas. In the case of Medellin, as we can see in this picture, the strategy was focused more toward the informal areas in the north of the city, while in Antioquia, the strategy is much more focused in the Urabá, since, as we saw in the previous slides, Urabá is one of the lowest in terms of social, economical, and institutional indicators. As a consequence, in 2011, when the administration of Fajardo started, a strategy of intervention was set up in order to define different kinds of strategies for the whole region. In order to understand Urabá, we need to understand that we can divide the Urabá region in two different areas, one toward the right of the image and one toward the left. The one toward the left is characterized by the really wild areas, pretty similar to what is Amazonia today, and is crossed by a big river which is called the Rio Atrato. Within this area, we have mostly indigenous communities, black Colombian communities, and the entitlement of the land is basically communal land. While toward the right of the graph, we can see a much more urbanized areas where the four cities that we are going to talk today are located. So the strategy of the governor is basically to implement, to foster conservation of biodiversity and also sustainable tourism in the Atrato region because of its wild condition. While toward the right, the challenge is to foster economic growth basically by bringing in infrastructure, bringing in agro-industry in order to differentiate the bananas plantation, and also a system of ports and industrial areas in order to speed up the economy. As a consequence of this, the four municipalities, Turbo, Apartadó, Carepa, and Chigorodó, as well as the small Necoclí, are needed urgently a new strategy of intervention to prepare these four cities to the future challenges that all these investments in terms of development will bring in. So, as a consequence, the Department of Antioquia called URBAN and asked us to define a planning strategy for particularly four municipalities, Turbo, Apartadó, Carepa, and Chigorodó. Why only these four municipalities and not Necoclí? Well, basically because Turbo, Apartadó, Carepa, and Chigorodó are informally conforming a metropolitan areas, and the relationship between them are really tight. And also because most of the infrastructure projects and also the investment are located within these strategic areas of development. So let's zoom in now and let's try to see which are the relations and the main characteristics and dynamics of these four municipalities. Here in the map toward the right, we can see basically the biggest amount of trips in terms of destinations. As we can see, the biggest circles are located in Apartado and Turbo. What does this mean? Well, basically that in Turbo and Apartado, most of the people are directing by trip. In Apartado, the reason why this happens is basically because the city is the center of services. In Apartado, main administrative services are located, the Chamber of Commerce is located, many banks and services for the banana economy. While in Turbo, the destiny is caused by the fact that Turbo is a port, and from Turbo depart daily many trips, ships, boats, and so on, which destination is mainly the Atrato River, which can be seen toward the left of the map, because Turbo is the role of Turbo is basically to connect the Urabá region of the Antioquia with all the river basin of the Atrato in order to bring in and provide foods and different kind of shipments to all the communities which are located along the Atrato, since they are absolutely uncommunicated with Medellin and the other big cities of Colombia, since the only way of access is the river. So Turbo and Apartado are really strategic, while Carepa and Chigorodó, as we can see from this small amount of trips, are less important in terms of destinations. Another characteristic is the way of grow, the way these municipalities are growing. If we look at the map to the right, we can see that the four black urban areas are surrounded by some kind of orange polygons. These polygons are almost as big as the present urban areas, meaning that the trend is provide a lot of land of expansion, even if, as we will see now later on, these municipalities present a very low level of density and a very low level of consolidation. Toward the left, we can see the case of Apartado, for example. In gray, we can see the land of expansion, and we can see that in this case is even bigger than the city itself. Even if we project the 3% rate of growth toward the next 10 to 15 years, well, the city won't be able to occupy the whole land of expansion, even because within the city itself, within the urban boundaries, there is a lot of space to manage an infill strategy, but also to densify more and more the city itself, without this meaning that we need to reach the density of cities like Medellin and so on. I mean, density is a relative matter, but what we are saying here is that these small cities still can account for a kind of increase in density within their present urban boundaries. And this is the case, this is the picture showing Carepa, one of the two small towns. It has around 40,000 people, and as we can see, I mean, it's pretty a rural city with no so much consolidation as was the case of Turbo, and also there is no clear definition between the rural and the urban, being this actually a kind of mix between the two systems. Another typical characteristic, which is a kind of problem for this area, is the progressive degradation of water system and the environment. If we check the level of coverage of sewage in Turbo, Apartado, Carepa and Chigorodó, without taking into account our small villages which are located around these cities, we can see that 100% of the sewage directly flow into the rivers. And this is a tremendous consequence for the quality of superficial water. As we can see in the map toward the right, we can see that the rivers that flows down from the mountains, once they intercept the four cities, they got absolutely polluted by the flow of the black waters coming from the city. The same thing happens also for the aquifer, which is located beneath the valley where are located Turbo, Apartado, Carepa and Chigorodó. Why? Well, basically because all the banana plantation are discharging a lot of agrochemics beneath the soil, affecting the quality of water of the aquifer. And this is a picture taken from the river Apartado, just outside Apartado, and as we can see the color of water, well, it's clear that the level of pollution is very, very high. Actually, if the image could smell, we will also would get affected by the smell, very bad smell of the water itself. So basically the situation that we have in these small and intermediate cities in Urabá present very low level of consolidation. These cities, apart from Turbo, are pretty new. I mean, they have been growing fastly during the past 20 to 30 years, but no more than that. They present a fast demographic growth, which will even increase according to all the projects and investment that the regional department is going to do in the area. And as a consequence, the demand for new infrastructure and services is increasing as well. But these municipalities, as we saw in the previous map, present an overall outward growth which is unsustainable, because costs of financing the new growth of the city are pretty high and is also inefficient in general terms. And as we also saw, we have a critical degradation of the environment and in particularly of the water sources. Apart from this, something that we didn't discuss yet is the very low institutional capacity of these municipalities. If I compare, for example, the number of civil servants that we have in Medellin, which are around 220 for a city of 2.5 million inhabitants, with the number of civil servants in Apartado, around 8 people only for the planning department, we can see that even the daily task of a city which is experimenting this fast growth and this high demand for new projects and new infrastructure is very difficult to sustain. And finally, a critical aspect also of these small cities in Urabá, but also in general in Colombia, is the loss of an urban identity. These cities doesn't present a clear image, a clear vision of their future. They don't have a clear idea of what the city is, the structure is. They are simply, most of the time, a general amount of housing, of streets, without no structure and no clear, again, identity. So let's come to our approach. Our approach in terms of the municipal integrated plans is to promote, in general terms, a sustainable urban growth. But how we can do it? Well, for us, the first criteria to be taken into account is the creating of a meaningful narrative to foster project identity and appropriation of the community for their own cities. What does this mean? Well, basically, this means that it's not only enough to build up sewage, to pave a street, and so on. We believe that urban planning needs also to build up dreams in order to make up a new vision of city, so that the community itself will get appropriate with their project, with their cities, and a new sense of belonging and identity will spread in place. And to manage this, just planning is not enough. We need to develop and implement action-oriented strategies. This means project concrete intervention which can change rapidly the environment and show a real change within the communities. And to do this, it's really important to define suitable standards and the reading of the context. When I talk about this, I think that this is really crucial, because when we used to talk with civil servants of these municipalities, they always use as an example Medellin. the big city with mega projects and a big intervention. But the reality of this municipality is pretty different. The stage of development of these municipalities is still toward a consolidation, while the big cities like Medellin, Cali, Cartagena, Bogota, etc., are experimenting a different stage of development. So we need to understand that these cities need to take into account a different level of standards for their projects. And in this panorama, for us, a critical aspect is the definition and implementation of public space as a way to trigger urban consolidation, since, as we saw in the previous pictures, these cities still need a platform, a public platform, to foster civic engagement and civic encounter. And another aspect that for us, and specifically in this kind of territories, we are in the tropic, we are rich in natural resources, the climate is really favorable. We think and we believe that we need to start to change the paradigm of grey infrastructure by moving toward the implementation of green infrastructure in order to build up a sort of equilibrium between the urban fabric and the natural environment. Only by doing this we will manage to foster sustainable cities toward the future, since nowadays we are really understanding that the role of ecosystemic services is really crucial for the quality of life of our population, of our community, but at the same time for the preservation of the environment. And finally, I would also like to add the role of the regional government. As I mentioned before, all this project has been done, fostered by the regional government, which is a crucial aspect in order to finance and to make all the strategies that we will see later on reliable. So let's start with the three projects. I will present the three strategic projects. The first one is the Integral Municipal Plan of Turbo, and I will present the strategic project for the Master Plan of Turbo. This is the image of Turbo, we already seen it before, and this is the main place, the strategic place of Turbo, the port. As we already mentioned it before, the port is crucial because it enhances the connectivity of the region with all the Atrato River basin. But at the same time, as we can see in the picture, the port is the central space of encounter for the whole community of Turbo. Just some data, we have 180,000 trips per year arriving in Turbo from the close by Atrato River basin. So the flow of commerce, of personnel, of shipments is really high. But at the same time, toward this port, there are two creeks which are highly contaminated because all the black waters coming from an informal sewages are discharging these creeks, and these creeks actually ended up into the port. So the port, apart from being an opportunity, is also nowadays represent a critical environmental problem because of the high level of contamination of their waters and their environment. But at the same time, the creeks are also a kind of opportunities because by doing an analysis of some of the green areas of these creeks, we realized that we have, for example, 42 different species of birds, which is somehow a surprise in such a polluted context, but also almost 200 kinds of trees which deserve restoration and conservation. So as a consequence, what we did in order to build up a dream for the city is to merge the three sectors, the Port Wafe, the Veranillo Creek and the Puerto Tranca, articulating and integrating the three sectors into a unique project. In the Port of Wafe, what we are simply proposing is basically the reorganization of the port, the functional reorganization of the port in order to allow a better movement of the ships, as well as an improvement of the land mobility in order to allow a better accessibility by the trucks that every day came from the region to the port. And also an arrangement, a restoration and an improvement of the platform of public spaces, as we saw, this place is also the main square, the main agora of the city. But at the same time, maybe the most interesting intervention has been suggested for the two creeks. In these two creeks, since they are a sort of natural connectors between the inner areas of the city and the port, we are suggesting to build up a kind of linear park where the implementation of the sewage, but especially the development of bioengineering and bioretention techniques, is allowing a more sustainable management of rainfall, as well as a conservation of the creeks from a natural perspective, while the public administration at a certain point was thinking of building up a concrete box culvert, which will ended up destroying all the natural resources, all the natural condition of these creeks. So we basically ended up by structuring the whole city by defining these two systems of accessibility for the human being, but also for the ecological systems, which will ended up into the port. The port which will present better condition for the ships, for the human being, but also a better environmental condition. This is the master plan of the blueprint of the port once renovated. This is an image we show at the top the present condition and at the bottom the future condition. This image shows basically how we propose to restore the creek, and at the bottom in a small image we can see the creek today. The idea is not to change abruptly the place, but on the contrary, to take advantages of the condition of the place by assessing vegetation's quality of water and small green infrastructure actions in order to make it much more usable for the human being, for the community, but also in terms of ecological preservation. And finally, we also suggest a kind of connectivity from the port to the beach in order to structure even more the pedestrian connection from the top of the city down to the beach, passing through the port. So in this sense, we are really organizing the city and structuring the city so that the city now has a north toward which develop its future growth. And this is an image showing the city once we even build up all the ecological corridors along the main street in order to foster an overall strategy for the whole city itself. Now we will go on with the case of the integral municipal plan of Chigorodo. Chigorodo is a city of around 50,000 inhabitants, more or less. As we can see from this picture, is presents a very low density, and the condition of the street, if you can call them street, is absolutely natural. The fact that you are not seeing car is pretty common. Actually, in Chigorodo we don't have many cars, as happens in Turbo and Apartado. I would call it much more a rural village than a city. And the mobility is mostly by bikes and by foot. And as in Turbo, the port was a strategic element. Here, for sure, the strategic element is the river Chigorodo. Look at this image taken from the main square of the city. Actually, the river in this part absolutely touch the center of the city. And as we can see from it, this is a critical potential to be reused in terms of structuring the new idea, the new vision of the city. Even if today this place is absolutely unused, even being so close to the city center. in terms of potential, so there is the river, but at the same time the river is also a cause of problems because of the strong erosion caused by it in proximity of the city center, because of the speed and the force that is pushing toward the side of the city. So what we did is basically understanding the natural dynamics of the river, not only in the segment, in the fragment where the river intercepts the city, but also up the river and down the river. So what we have been doing is dividing the river in different sectors. Each one of those needs to be treated in different ways. For example, as we can see in the segment T1B, well, there we are trying to planning the city in order to allow the river to float, so that this floating will slow down the energy with which the river will intercept the city center. And according to this environmental planning, what we are trying to do is to adapting the way the city needs to grow according to the logic and the necessity of the river itself. Basically, our idea is to allow the river to flow in order to make an equilibrium, to achieve an equilibrium between the river itself and the city. So once we have done this, what we are achieving is basically what we are doing is basically to defining different kind of uses for each fragment of the river in its intersection with the city and with the suburban areas. So for example, in the city center we suggest a linear park with a strong natural component. In the suburban areas we are trying to use adaptable uses like productive uses or agropecuarian uses, and so and so. Each use is defined by the necessity of the hydrodynamics. And this is the master plan, the blueprint of the inner city, where the river actually is erosioning the city center. We can see toward the left, the top left of the image, the main square of the city, and we also can see how all these projects try to implement really soft tech intervention, so not to lose the logic of the place, the identity of the place, because we don't want to lose all this beautiful vegetation, but otherwise the city itself was thinking of changing by implementing big retaining walls all along this bottom side of the city in order to prevent the continuing of the erosion dynamic. This is an image at the top of the image, the present situation, and at the bottom the proposed situation. Obviously, we increase. We suggest pedestrian bridges, public spaces, pathways, but everything without changing the natural condition of the place. And on the contrary, by fostering new ecological restoration, by inserting and planting plants of the region in order to make this area even more green than it is today. This is another area, another part of the project closest to the urban fabric, and again the criteria is similar, even if obviously we are building up much more public space in order to allow the community to use the area. And finally, a last image which can show us how would be the relation with of the city with the river once the linear park is defined. And what we can see is that from the air, what we see is only a natural corridor without strong and gray intervention, which would change abruptly the landscape of the city. And finally, the case of Apartado, the integral municipal plan of Apartado. Apartado, as I mentioned you before, is the biggest city and the central of the the biggest centrality of the region itself, as we can see from this image. This image is taken over the main route of access of the city, which basically cross over the middle of the city. The other strong element is the river Apartado. So basically in this case we have the two strategic elements, which are the main route and the river. As we can see in the bottom, in the picture at the bottom right, actually this the river and the street build up a kind of cross in the middle of the city. Here maybe it's even easier to understand. The red line is the main route of access, and the blue line, the blue polygon, is the river itself. So here what we did, understanding that the new main route which will connect Medellin with the region will cross within the city, we suggested to make of this functional street the main place of encounter of the city, since today there is no square, there is no place where the community is used to meet together. So toward the right we can see the definition of the section from the top to the bottom, and again an image which show how we are trying to reconvert the street by gaining space to the cars, because nowadays 90% of the section is occupied by vehicles. So by changing and reducing the street, we are managing to provide new spaces of encounter for the population. And at the same time, as we've seen in the previous project, we are trying to bring in criteria for green infrastructure, like for example in this case the ecological restoration of the corridor, in order to bring in all these birds that are migrating yearly from North America to South America across Urabá, since Urabá is so close to Panama, and Panama is a natural channel for the migratory process of the birds. And at the same time, we are also suggesting bioretention systems in order to capture all the high amount of rainfall that every year affect the region of Urabá. So by doing this, we are saying to the municipalities, you are still in a process of consolidation, try to change the model of urban construction that has been used in the old cities of Colombia, by introducing innovative actions that can really make a change in the way these cities are going to be consolidated and are going to grow toward the future. This is also a section, a plan of our idea for the river, and again, as we can see here, the criteria is the same. We don't need to change abruptly the landscape, but only by intervening with really small actions, make the place much more usable for the community without affecting the natural environment.